So I know we're in a sanctuary, but we're not in church, so let's kind of liven up a little bit. See if we can't have a little fun. As Dr. Winslet said, my name's Wade Meadows, and most importantly, I'm a person in long-term recovery. And so talking about substance abuse might be a difficult subject for most people. It's kind of my passion. I don't know why God chose this path for me, but you know, being an addict, I would say today is like what I call the greatest gift that I've ever received. You know, it's like the gift that never stops giving. It's kind of forced me into a way of life and given me a career and given me a passion, given me a people that I'm passionate about, care about, and work for. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to try to give you a lot of education and a lot of experience on things that we see that are valuable that work. But I think that if we're going to do that, then let's just start at the beginning on what it is that we're talking about when we say substance use disorder or addiction. And so we call this the three-part problem. Basically, the cycle of addiction, if you want to call it that. I will use the word addict and addiction. Pardon me for saying those things. I am that, and it's not offensive to me, so I'll use those terms. Substance use disorder may be more politically correct, if you will, and feel free to make that translation in your mind. Sorry to be offensive if those terms bother you, but it's been in about 12 years with a heroin addiction. I believe that I'm an addict, and I believe that I had addiction. So I'll use those terms, but basically the three-part problem is what we're going to talk about, and I'll use 12-step language here a lot, but we'll call it powerlessness, and so understanding what it is truly to be powerless over drugs and alcohol. So I'll start by telling you this. I had spent about 5 years in recovery, in sobriety. Do y'all mind if I move around a little bit? Those lights are a little bright. It's hard to see you guys. So I'd spent about 5 years in recovery from an opiate heroin addiction, and was very active in Alcoholics Anonymous, was a 12-step guy, and did well for the most part for putting my life back together and kind of understanding what underlying causes and conditions there are going on in my life and childhood trauma, things of that nature. And then I took a different job. And so basically what my schedule looked like is I worked during the day and I went to AA meetings in the evening time. And then I took a new job working in the evening times. Now, common sense would tell you then you start going to meetings during the daylight hours. And I didn't make that connection. So I quit going to meetings. And a funny thing happened is I went about 2 weeks without going to meetings, and I didn't get high, and I didn't feel like anything had changed. And so I just said, maybe I don't need to go to these meetings or have this sponsor or work these steps. I thought that I'd worked them, at least in my mind, I worked them pretty well, and just naturally the way that I live my life. But it took about 1.5 years from stopping going to meetings, you know, stop having a sponsor, and I guess you could say stop working any kind of program. And eventually, the way I would say it is, when I walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I felt very low. And I felt like getting high made me a better version of myself. In the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, those two things switched places, right? But over a period of time of being dry, not using, and not working a program, those things switched places again. And so for me, it kind of became it felt like a good idea in the moment to use drugs. For me, that was smoking marijuana, and it sounded like a good idea. I was going to do it on a Friday. It's going to be a one-time thing. We're going to smoke weed, right? We're going to put it down. I'm going to wake up Saturday and go on about my life, and maybe sometime in the future, if I have a whim, I'll do it again, right? And I smoked marijuana on a Friday, smoked it all day on Saturday, all day on Sunday, stole a container of pain pills from a family member on Monday, and by Wednesday, I was back sticking needles in my arm. So it's kind of rapid that fast. But I say that to say, having had some experience in recovery, I ended up basically in a situation where my family had seen me in active addiction, and then they had seen me in recovery. And at this point, they were seeing me in active addiction. And they were pointing at it, But, you know, if you don't catch me with my hand in the cookie jar, then I'm going to lie and deny and tell you that you're crazy and you're wrong and all the things. And ultimately, I don't know if any of you have ever seen the movie Flight with Denzel Washington. Y'all familiar with that? You can shake your hand. Yeah, some of you. There's a scene in that movie where he's at a hearing, and basically he could tell one more lie and it would clear up, keeping his license. He could continue to be a pilot, have his career, everything. And the only person that could dispute his lie died in a plane crash, and she's dead and gone, and she couldn't dispute his lie, right? And he said in that moment, it was just like I ran out of lies. And he told the truth. He said, I was drunk when I was flying the plane. Matter of fact, I'm drunk right now. And there was just a moment where my mom had asked me a question. And I wish I could remember the 2 questions that she asked me. But I answered, and I probably told a lie. And then she asked me a second question, and I gave her an answer. And she said, Wade, both of those things can't be true at the same time. And she kind of cornered me. And in that moment, it was like I just ran out of lies. And I said, Mom, I'm back on drugs. Now, at the time, I really don't know where this lands, right? I just know that I had to get it off my chest. And so I say, Mom, I'm back on drugs. Well, about 48 hours later, I found myself in my 7th rehab where I didn't want to be, you know, and I had spent enough time in recovery to know how to practice a program, to know how to get sober. And so rehab was not necessary. And so I didn't want to be there. But I walked into that rehab that night, and the drugs were wearing off. And I was kind of starting to feel sick, in a lot of pain. I was lonely. I was afraid. And there's a plastic-covered mattress that I'm about to sleep on. It's a humbling experience, right? Felt very low. Again, very afraid. And tears are pouring down my face. And all I could think was, I hate you, Mom. I hate you, Mom. Because I felt like she had put me back there, you know, and that's not where I wanted to be. And the reason I say that is because in that place of brokenness, in that place of pain, that's in the beginning stages of a treatment, right? And I walk in, and like I said, I'm scared, I'm afraid, I'm hurting, I'm sick, I'm lonely, I'm all these things, and I'm down. And then I have therapists come up to me, and they start saying words like powerless, right? And I have no clue what it means to be powerless. But for me, as an alcoholic or an addict, in my mind, when I hear the term powerless, what I think is, I just need to try harder at staying sober. I just need to try harder. And so a lot of times in a treatment environment, people come into treatment and you'll hear them say, no one's teaching me anything here. I'm not learning anything. This is a waste of my time. And the reality is because you already know right from wrong. You already know right from wrong. The problem with the addict or the alcoholic isn't their inability to understand right and wrong. The problem with an addict or an alcoholic is, how come you can't do right for very long? That's the issue. Knowing right from wrong isn't so much the struggle, it's how come you can only do right for a few days, right? And then you fall back off. We say, Brad will probably touch on this, pardon me. Brad will probably touch on this. We say if you strapped a lie detector test to an addict or an alcoholic in the middle of crisis, they would tell you that they want to be sober, and they would pass a lie detector test. They mean it. They mean it with everything in them. But the problem is 3 or 4 days later, they're using drugs again. Why do we keep ending up back there? This is where I started to have to understand what it is truly to be powerless, right? So what we're going to talk about is a cycle of addiction, but we're going to identify powerlessness in 3 parts. So the first part is what we call the allergy of the body. This was a term defined by Dr. William Silkworth, who was a doctor in the early stages of Alcoholics Anonymous. He helped Bill Wilson get sober, and he had this term that we call the allergy of the body. And you'll see there it says, I can't stop once I start. So understanding addiction, this is the first place that we have to go to, is that once I introduce drugs or alcohol into my body, I lose all control over how much or how long I continue to use them. So when I was using, if anybody familiar with opiates at all, when you run out of opiates, you get very sick. So as an opiate addict, if I run out, I get really, really sick, and so I don't ever want to run out. So, excuse me. So I have no, you're good. I have a paycheck that's a certain amount of money, And I know how much of my money I can spend on drugs and alcohol and still be able to pay my bills, right? And that's the concept in my mind, is that I can do this and do it successfully. And so let's just say I'm going to get paid on Friday, and then I'm going to get another paycheck next Friday. And I have maybe $200 of that I could spend on drugs and alcohol. So I'm going to buy 10 pills, and I'm going to space 10 pills out from one paycheck to the next paycheck. I can get high every day. I never experience dope sickness, and I don't ever go into financial ruin and cause any damage, right? And I get to experience high every day, and everything's going to work out, right? So I go cash my check, call the dope man up, say, hey, man, come by, I'm going to get 10 pills. He says, come through. I give him the money, he gives me the pills, and I do the pill, right? And I still have 9 pills that's planned how I'm going to space it out for the next 7 days until I get paid again. And then about 30 minutes, something later, something weird starts to happen. There's a conversation in my mind that starts to kind of sound like, you know, Wade, you feel really good. It's been a long week. Friday, you just got paid, right? This is a good buzz, but it's not quite where you want to be. Why don't you just do one more of these pills? You'll have 8 pills left. You'll have plenty of pills you can space out over the whole week. Why don't you do one more and at least enjoy this buzz? And so I would do another pill. And then about 30 minutes later, the conversation would begin again. You know, Wade, feel really good, almost perfect, right? A little more is going to get you right where you want to be. Still have 7 pills, right? Got plenty. That's Saturday to Friday. We're going to make it. There's enough pills. Everything's going to work out. And I would do another pill. 30, 45 minutes later, same conversation begins again. You know, maybe you can do a half a pill on Tuesday and a half a pill on Wednesday and stretch it out a little bit. Or Sunday, we can just lay around and watch TV. If we didn't do any pills, it wouldn't be a big deal. If we were sick that day, and I would do another pill. And 30 minutes later, I do another pill. 30 minutes later, I do another pill. And this is what we call the allergy of the body, meaning once I start, I don't have any control over how much or how long I use. But the tricky thing is for the addict or alcoholic, it doesn't look like an internal struggle of, I don't want to do it, but I keep having to do it. And that's what you want it to look like. But for us, it doesn't look that way at all. It looks like a real natural, rational conversation in my mind that says, I'm almost right where I want to be. Let me do a little more and I'll figure it out later. Let me do a little more and I'll figure it out later. Let me do a little more and I'll figure it out later. And I just keep using until I run out. Or what we say is I run into something hard, right? The only way that I'll stop using is for me to run into something hard. So what we have is, as a result of the allergy, next slide, please. We have consequences. And so because I can't stop when I start using, eventually I start to show consequences, which is evident of the allergy. I start to have health problems, right? You'll see liver damage. You'll see heart problems. I don't know of any other health problems that you have. Swollen ankles, right? Body holding water, a lot of things like that. Then we start to have social consequences. We have strained relationships. We lose our, child services get involved. We lose our kids. We have families that don't want anything to do with us. We have marriages that get damaged. We have divorces going on. We have lots of social consequences. And then we also have legal issues where you'll see we'll get arrested or we get DUIs, right? And so at this point, if I was working with a group of people in treatment, I would say, how old were you when you started using drugs or alcohol? And you're going to see, they say 12 years old, 13 years old, 17 years old, 16 years old, right? And you're going to see constantly somewhere in early teens, they started using drugs and alcohol. So what I would do with them is I circle this up here. DUI, overdose, health problems, heart problems, right? Relationship problems. And I say, when you were 12 years old and you started using drugs and alcohol, when you were 17 years old and you started using drugs and alcohol, was this the life that you wanted for yourself? Is that where you saw life headed? And typically the answer is no, right? No, that's not where I wanted to be, right? And so what happens is, because these problems start to show up, I can't stop when I start, and I use until I get arrested, or I use until my mom throws me in a treatment center, or I use until my wife tells me, hey, if I catch you drinking again, it's over, we're getting a divorce, right? I use right up until the point where there's a consequence enough that says I have to stop, right? So now I want to stop, which puts me into the second part of our problem, financial problems, we have those, roll on, which is what we call the spiritual malady. In Alcoholics Anonymous, we call it the spiritual malady. If you'll see, we use the word hyphenated there, okay? So I was 19 years old, and I experimented with a lot of drugs. I was drinking a lot, smoking a lot of marijuana. I had done cocaine. Ecstasy was a big drug for me back then. We did that on the weekends a lot. I was eating a lot of different pills, kind of finding my way, if you will. But I was a freshman in a community college, and I wasn't a very good student, had never been a good student. And I had an experience when I went to class, and I looked around the room. I felt like everyone else in that class had some piece of information, some prerequisite that allowed them the opportunity to be successful in school. Whatever they had, I didn't have it. Now, I don't know if they went to a better high school than I went to. I don't know if they were just smarter than I was, or if they paid attention in class and I was daydreaming. I don't know how they came about having that information, but because they have it, they're going to do well in class. And because I don't have it, I'm going to fail, right? And that's my secret, that I don't belong here, that I don't measure up, that I'm not good enough. And as soon as you find that out about me, you're going to kick me out of here, right? Now, I'm a lefty. Any lefties in here? A lot. I like it. I like it. So if you know classroom desks, they have an armrest for right-handed people, right? Discriminating against left-handers. And so if you're left-handed, what you do is you turn sideways in your chair, and then you have an armrest. And so me, being the good addict and alcoholic that I am, right, I figured out if you sit up against the right-hand wall of the classroom and then you turn, you can hide and face the wall. And you never have to look your peers in the eye. And if you don't look the instructor in the eye, he's probably not going to call on you to answer any questions. And no one's ever going to find out my secret, that I don't belong here, that I don't measure up, that I don't have what it takes, that you're going to throw me away eventually, right? And so how long can I hold on and maintain that secret? So we get assigned, this was freshman English, and we get assigned a paper, and I would tell you that we probably had 2 weeks to write this paper before it was due. I waited till the night before it was due because once I turn it in for a grade, the game's up, right? Everybody knows my secret. Everybody knows I don't have what it takes. I don't measure up. And so I call up a buddy of mine. I wait till the night before it's due. I call up a buddy and I say, hey, why don't you come pick me up? Let's ride around. Let's smoke some pot. I'm going to go back home and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write this paper that's due tomorrow. So he picks me up. We ride around. We smoke a little pot. And then we pull back in the driveway, and he hands me a handful of hydrocodones, which is opioid-based pain pills. And he says, here, take these, Wade. It'll help you write your paper. And it turns out those are the truest words I've ever heard spoken in my life. I swallowed down a handful of hydrocodone, and I went and I sat down at a computer. And then I started typing. And about 20 minutes later, I have a little sweat on my forehead, right? And my nose is itching really bad. And I'm trying to type with two hands, but you can't type with two hands because you keep having to scratch your face. So I was agitated and I was frustrated. But at the same time, I had this, what I call an aha moment, where I believed I was writing the greatest English paper that had ever been written. That's a little bit of an exaggeration. But keep in mind that I turned sideways in my chair and I put my face against the wall, and I hide. And then I introduce opiates into my body, and I believe I'm going to turn my paper in for a grade. In the following class, he's going to ask me to stand up in front of the class and read my paper out loud, because it's a great example of the perfect English paper, right? I'll say this, freshman English, probably going to grade for grammar, right? Which means you should write one, rough draft. You should edit it. You should rewrite it. You should shuffle some words around, move some sentences around, right? Rewrite it, edit it, rewrite it until you get it structured the way you want it to say exactly what you want to say, and then you should edit it for grammar, right? In my mind, this was kind of like one shot, one kill. Grammar, like she's going to notice there's grammar mistakes. Have you seen the content of this paper? It is fantastic. And so what we call that is, like I said, the aha moment. I'm sure a lot of you have heard the phrase chasing the dragon, right? Chasing the dragon is trying to recreate that experience of the first high, that moment where when I introduced my drug of choice into my body, I became a better version of myself, right? Now, couple this with the allergy that we just talked about, where I can't stop when I start, and because I keep having to use it to feel like a better version of myself, and I can't stop when I start, and I keep having consequences, so I want to take the drugs and alcohol out of my life, right? I know that they are the cause of the consequence. So my wife says, if I catch you drinking again, you're going to get divorced. My boss says, if we catch you drinking again, you're fired, right? I have a court case, and they say, if you can't pass a drug test, you're going to go to prison, right? And so I definitely want to stop. But the problem is, if drugs and alcohol is the thing that allows me to come off of the wall and look the world in the eyes and feel adequate and feel okay and feel capable, when you take it away from me, then I have to return back to the wall, and I have to hide again, right? You've taken away my solution. You've taken away the only thing that has ever made me feel adequate or okay, right? So what we call this is the spiritual malady. So we see that it's feelings of emptiness, void, feelings of less than, anxiety, restlessness, depression, hopelessness, shame, guilt. In Alcoholics Anonymous, we say restless, irritable, discontent. I suffer from a feeling of restlessness, irritable, and discontent. I always have a feeling that I don't fit in my skin, that I'm inadequate, that something about me is flawed and wrong and not good enough. And I don't want any of you to ever find that out about me, right? And so we call this the spiritual malady. So move on. So we go to the broken brain. So I suffer from this thing called a spiritual malady, and I'll explain the broken brain, and then we'll kind of dive back into the three-part problem. So what we see is a healthy brain on the left, and as you can see, a lot of lights at the bottom, and an addicted brain, some lights at the bottom, but you see no lights at the front of the brain, right? I'm going to give you a very 7th grade version of this. I'm no neuroscientist, I'm no doctor, right? But basically, this is it. So at the bottom of the brain is back here at the base of the skull. It's what we call the survival center, 7th grade math here, 7th grade level. We're going to call it the go, right? That's just the go center. And at the front up here is the prefrontal cortex. You can see a lot of light in the healthy brain and very little, if any, light in the addicted brain. And we're going to call that area of the brain stop, right? So what happens is the back here, the go center, whenever I'm uncomfortable, survival, pleasure, kicks on. And it tells me things that I do in order to survive, in order to feel better, to quit feeling dis-ease or discomfort, right? And then it sends the signals to the front area of my brain, stop. And that area of my brain basically says, that's a good idea, you should do it. That's a bad idea, you should not do it, right? Good idea, bad idea, good idea, bad idea. And if you look here, you notice that that is the area of the brain of the addict that doesn't function. It doesn't work, right? We call this the broken brain. You see very little activity in the front area of the brain, right? And so if I'm using drugs and alcohol and it's causing problems, and you take them away from me, and then I recoil back and I turn back to the wall, and I feel less than again, right? So now my disease, my discomfort is kicked in, so the area in my brain is tripped on that says, survive, 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 right? And what does it tell me to do that always makes me feel comfortable? It says, get high, right? But the area that tells me that's going to get you divorced, that's going to get you fired, that's going to put you in prison, that area doesn't register. It doesn't show up, right? It doesn't say good idea, bad idea. It just says that will relieve discomfort. And so my mind starts saying, get high, get high, get high. You can go to the next slide, please. Which is what we call the mental obsession, right? So I suffer from this thing called the mental obsession. And I say that it is the lie that an addict or an alcoholic tells themselves to justify their behavior. So we say, not only can I not stop once I start, how come I can't stay stopped when I stop, right? Go to the next slide for me. And so what happens is an alcoholic says, the book of Alcoholics Anonymous says, the great obsession of every abnormal drinker is to control and enjoy his drinking, right? And so what my mind is telling me is, how can I drink enough, use enough drugs to come off the wall, feel okay in the world, and not drink so much that I have the health problems, the social problems, the financial problems, the legal problems, right? And my mind tells me I'm going to be able to do this successfully. And so the lies that an addict tells themselves is, I can stop anytime I want, right? I'm only going to have one. It's not going to hurt anybody. I just need it to relax. I can handle it better than others. I always say the other one I would use is, I'm going to get sober tomorrow, right? Today is just not a good day for it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tie one on tonight and I'll start again tomorrow, right? In Bill Wilson's story in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, he says, the courage to do battle the following morning wasn't there. And that is, to me, that was an experience that I had to learn, is I kept having this idea in my mind that I'm just going to do it today, tomorrow I'll get sober, right? And I had to realize that the next day, the courage to do battle wasn't there. The next day, I kept repeating the same lie to myself. I'll get sober tomorrow. I'll get sober tomorrow. I'll get sober tomorrow, right? 7 years later, I'm still waiting on tomorrow to come, okay? And so I suffer from this thing called the mental obsession, right? And that is the lie that I tell myself I can use. But because I don't have the reasoning and the logic portion of my brain to stop me, I believe these ideas. Well, then once I use, now I'm back to the allergy again. So if I introduce drugs and alcohol into my body, I lose control over how much or how long I'm going to continue to take it. And I don't stop until something bad happens. Something bad happens, I don't want to use anymore, and I feel uncomfortable, feel like I don't measure up, I feel inadequate, so that go area in my brain starts to kick on again, and it starts to tell me, get high would feel better, you can control it this time, you can do it successfully, you can just get high today, don't get high tomorrow, you can get sober tomorrow, or you can just have 2 drinks this time, Wade, or only buy 2 pills instead of 10 pills, you can do it, you can control it, right? You can have enough to relieve the discomfort and not have so much to have consequences in your life. And I say, yes, I can do it this time. And then I use again, and I'm back to the allergy, add another consequence, right? And so what we see is, roll it one time, a cycle that begins to show up. I have an allergy, I have a problem, take it away from me, I have no solution, so I stay in a constant state of dis-ease, discomfort, which triggers on a mental obsession, which is a lie that I'll tell myself of how I'm going to control and enjoy my drinking, drink successfully, and I use again, and then I'm back to the allergy, use until a consequence, take it away, and so on and so forth. Now, the tricky part with this is the addict or the alcoholic might cycle through this in 30 minutes. They might cycle through this in 30 days, right? It's a rapid cycle that goes on or a long-term cycle that goes on. And most of the time, both of those are going on simultaneously, right? But we stay stuck in this cycle. So that leads us to the question is, how do you break the cycle? How do you break the cycle, right? And so if we know that the allergy is biological, once I introduce drugs and alcohol into my body, I have no control over how much or how long I'm going to continue to use, then I can't put it in, right? And if I know that once I'm uncomfortable, the mental obsession starts, right? If I obsess, I use. I always ask addicts and alcoholics this question. I say, if you don't think that the mental obsession is true, right? Once I obsess, I'm using. And if you don't believe that, I ask them this. I say, how many of you have ever been on the way to the liquor store or the dope man and said, you know what, this is a bad idea. I'm going to turn around and go back home, you know? And every one of them, like, never, you know. I did it one time, right? Out of 19 years of using drugs and alcohol, one time. One time you said you could do it and you believe that, well, then I'm capable of doing it. No, you're not, right? You forget all the examples of where you couldn't do it. So if I obsess, I use. And if I use, the allergy is that's biological, right? There's no getting around it. And so ultimately what we come to is where the treatment has to be is in the spiritual malady or the disease. I always like to look at it this way. Alcoholism is what exists between my last drink and my next drink. It's the feeling I have when I'm not drinking. I was in a seminar one time. I was with a coworker. He's also in long-term recovery. And the lady was doing identifying triggers. And we were going around the room, and all these people were saying their triggers. And it got to my coworker, and he said, eyesight. And she said, eyesight? I've never heard of that as a trigger. What do you mean, eyesight? And he said, well, as soon as I open my eyes in the morning, all I can think about is how I'm going to get high today. So eyesight is my trigger, right? So basically, that's what we're talking about is I live in a constant state of feeling less than, feeling inadequate, feeling not good enough, feeling like I don't measure up, right? And so I have to learn in recovery, how can I go through life, experiencing life in a way that I always feel uncomfortable, I always feel inadequate, I always feel like I don't measure up without a mental obsession starting. What do I need to do to relieve the feeling of discomfort, right? Because once the obsession starts, I use, and if I use, bad things are going to happen, right? I put drugs and alcohol into a sober body basically 7 times, 8 times maybe, whatever, and I've landed in a drug and alcohol treatment center 7 different times, right? It ends in the same place every single time. You know, that's lucky for me, right? Because jails, institutions, and death is what we say, right? I'm sure some of you in this room have someone that you know that has passed away from a drug overdose or has a child that's passed away or something like that, right? It's affecting us all. 100,000 people or whatever died of a fentanyl overdose over in the, within, every year basically is what's happening. So we end up in drugs, we end up in jails, we end up in treatment centers, or we pass away, right? So basically what we're going to talk about the rest of the day is how do we begin to treat that spiritual malady. So hopefully you got a better understanding of the problem as we see it. And Dr. Winslet, that's all I got. You want to do some questions? Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Right. I mean, to me, the answer is about 15 months. And then that's a thing that's evolving and ever growing, right? Is like my belief today is far different than it was at the beginning of my journey. But I would say the reason I say about 15 months is this, is I had the idea, pick myself up by my bootstraps, work harder, do better, become the thing that you're supposed to be, and you'll get sober, and you'll live sober, right? And what I had to learn is I was working backwards. That ultimately I just needed to say out loud who I am and embrace who I am, right? I guess biblically speaking, let's look at it this way. If I could become this thing that I've always wanted to be, then God will love me. And if I could just achieve that, then I could experience God's love and I'll live happily ever after. What I had to learn is God loves me in my sickest moment. And when I could figure that out, then I changed and got sober. But it took me probably 15 months of being in the rooms and hearing other people's stories to be able to say out loud these things about me that I'm very embarrassed about. I don't want you to know those things about me. I don't want them to be true. If I could just become this better thing, then those things will no longer be true and no one ever has to know those things, and then God will love me, you know. And I learned that actually through other people, you know, that I heard them tell their story and put those embarrassing things about themselves out into the open. And then I saw people loved them anyway. And so then I could start sharing some of my embarrassing things. And the more I shared those, this is funny how AA works. I go to a meeting and I quote the big book and I tell you all these wonderful things about how to stay sober. And after I get done, everybody's like, yeah, thanks. And then the next day I go to a meeting and I'm in a bad headspace. And I say, oh my gosh, let me tell you how bad my day is. And I vomit all this yuckiness about myself. And after that meeting, everybody comes up to me and they go, oh God, that was the best share I've ever heard. I love you so much. And I relate to you. And so that's what I kind of had to learn, is that it's in my sickness. It's in my embarrassment. It's in my illness. That's where actually, to me, that's where God is. And so I would say it probably took about 15 months of trusting those things could come out of my mouth out loud, especially in a room full of people, you know. That was hard. And that, you know, maybe my whole first stint in sobriety, I didn't learn that. You know? And so the second time, maybe the window was shorter. Good question. Yes, sir.
Let me get this on so we can all hear. Wade, thank you so much. As the parent of a recovering addict, this was painfully opening of wounds from the past, as you might imagine. But even though our daughter is 10 years clean, we live every day of our lives in fear. I'm curious about the use of the term allergy. To me, what I'm interpreting is that minimizes. And when I think of an allergy, I think of a disease that is outside of my control and apart from decision making. So I'm just curious about why you're using the term allergy, term addiction.
Addiction is the disease. Allergy is one component of the disease. And so allergy just simply means that I have an abnormal response to, right? So I guess we would say it like this: is a normal person, if there is such thing, has 3 drinks, right? The first drink causes a swelling of the tongue. The second drink causes a feeling of nauseousness, and the third drink causes sleep. You know, you get very sleepy. For the alcoholic, the first drink has very little, if any, impact. The second drink causes somewhat numbing of the tongue, and the third drink creates energy. Abnormal response, right? Normal people drink 3 drinks, they're done. Time to go to bed. An alcoholic drinks 3 drinks, and they say, it's time to go out the door. Time to go out into the world, right? And so the allergy just means that it's an abnormal response to. But that is only one element of addiction. That's why this the 3-part problem is there's so many other components of it. There's the broken brain science behind it, right? There's the spiritual malady part of it. So I would say I'm not just calling addiction an allergy. I'm just saying that is one piece of it. You know, I will say this. I just got sober, and I was working in a restaurant, and there was 2 girls. One girl was 26 and the other girl was 19. It was just a beautiful story. The 19-year-old is her second day of work, and the 26-year-old is like trying to show her the ways of the world. At 26, you have all the answers, right? And in the restaurant industry, there's a lot of drugs. So this 19-year-old girl asked her, and I think she's trying to figure out who can I trust and who can I not trust. And she asked this girl that's 26, she says, do you ever smoke pot? And I'm very new to sobriety. And the girl says, no, I have such an addictive personality. I just knew I would love it so much, so I never did it. And I remember thinking, well, you don't have an addictive personality. And I was like, well, wait a minute. What is an addictive personality? And I had to really start to ask myself that question. What does it mean to have an addictive personality? Because I knew I would like it too much, and I couldn't stop doing it. How come she knew that and didn't do it? I knew it and did it anyway, right? And so it's a little more than just the allergy. There's another component of, I love, like, can't stop when I start is a major issue. Can't stay stopped once I do stop. That's the crux of the problem, right? You had a question too, sir?
Question. Bill?
We've heard a lot of truth today. You're like an open book. But an alcoholic is full of lies. And until the truth comes out and they can say the truth, they're going to stay in that cycle. Do they believe their own lies? Is that what keeps them there? I mean, just wondering about the truth versus the lies.
100%. I mean, the lies I believe is that I'm not hurting anybody. I can control it. I can, those are the lies I believe. Now, if I'm fixing to drive to Birmingham to meet with the dope man and I tell my mom I just got to work today, I don't believe that lie. I'm just covering up to do what it is that I do. To me, yes, I believe that I can control it. I do believe that I'm not causing near as much damage. I do believe that the system is crooked and it's just out to get me. I do believe that I'm a victim. I certainly believe those lies 100%, right? We say that in Alcoholics Anonymous, we say that cannot recognize differentiate the truth from the false. That every time I drink uncontrollably, but in my mind I still believe that was yesterday, today's a different day, I'm going to control it today. And I believe that I can do that. So yes, we do believe our own lies, if you will. I don't know if that helps answer the question. But depends on what lies we're talking about more than anything.
Jim?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Wade, for sharing today. So a couple questions. So you right now, you're sober 10 years, you say, 12? 8? Congratulations.
10.
That's
we'll
awesome.
call it 10.
Yeah, man, no. So as a lot of us are clergy in here, Christians. We believe in life transformation. We believe that God begins and can change us, rewire us, remake us. How does that affect the spiritual malady of an addict, of a person, of anybody? And how then does that affect the actual brain of that person? Is there a change in that brain? And after you've been sober for 10, 12, 13 years, if you were to be scanned again, brain scan, what would your brain look like today?
Yeah, so science says that about 2 to 5 years, you'll see activity in the brain qualifying as like normal functioning. So like the brain on the right would look more like the brain on the left within a 2 to 5 year period. Now, I think that there's a lot of things within that. Did I start shopping all the time? Did I start using relationships? Did I start shopping or gambling or doing other things that are basically seeking external validation? Then I'm taking that 2 to 5 years and increasing it every time because I'm still not generating a feeling of good enough from within, right? So as long as I'm seeking externally to create that good enough feeling, then I'm not rewiring the brain, right? I'm just finding it's not drugs and alcohol anymore, it's just the next thing. So correct, right. And so I don't believe, I believe that rewiring is a thing, but I also believe, and Matt will touch on probably some of this more than I can, but I also believe in trauma. I believe long-term consequences of trauma. So let me say it like this. If my phone rings right now and it's my boss and he says, hey, I need you to get into the office, we got to have a conversation. Right? trauma response is like, oh God, something really, really tragic and bad is about to happen. Just because, and that may not sound like trauma to you, but it's like, how did my father act towards me as a child? And then how is my boss mimicking my father in that moment, right? And so I don't know that in my own experience, 8 years down the road, right, is I still feel less than. I still feel inadequate. But today, rather than I am inadequate, today I can say, let me gather some facts. My boss called me and he says, well, you need to come into the office. We need to have a conversation. I can say, I did my job yesterday. I did my job the day before that. My numbers are where they're supposed to be, right? Everything on paper says I have absolutely no reason to be in trouble at work, right? Now I can go into that meeting and feel more confident, right? I dealt with facts, right? Now, let's say I haven't done any of those things, and I can go into that meeting and be like, take whatever you're going to give me because I've earned that, right? And so I can deal with facts, if that makes sense, today, whereas in the beginning, anything that triggered that, I internally was not good enough, right? I wasn't adequate. Today I can recognize that's just a feeling. It's not real. It's not true. Standing up in front of a room full of people. Something adequate about me, right? So I can deal with facts today more than my mind. But I don't think that the thoughts are necessarily different today than they were back then.
Heard is that your addiction is doing push-ups while you're in recovery.
That's what people say.
Right,
yeah.
Just getting stronger, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true or not, but so somebody who has been sober for years, so a couple questions. Do they need to, stay in recovery in the meetings and all those things? I have people that it's like, well, I'm a Christian now. I don't need to go to meetings. I'm like, I don't know the answer to that question. It's like, how do you respond to that? And it may be an individualized one. And even then when the brain does get sort of rewired, spirit transformation, all those good things happen, they go out and have one, is that, I've had guys come in and say, well, now I can handle the drink. Right. And I'm like, what do you say to those people? How do we handle that?
In the steps, right? In the 12 steps, you'll see God as we understand God. And we think along the lines of comprehending God. How do I comprehend God when we say understanding? I look at it as understanding means in what way is God and I able to communicate with one another? That's how I understand God, is where's the communication coming from? And I don't know, that's a personal thing. I'm struggling really bad with the third step, which is turning my will over to God, And I just believed that God was supposed to give me this signal, and he was going to say, you're going to marry this girl, you're going to live in this town, you're going to have this job, you're going to buy this house, drive this kind of car. If God would give me those details, I'll live happily ever after, right? But he never would give me those details. But I kept praying every day, And so one day I'm on my hands and my knees, and I'm praying, because that's the way I was taught to do it. And I get this resounding voice in my son, thou shalt go to Egypt and dig a well. And I'm like, I know what to do with my life, right? I got the answers. And so I call my sponsor. God spoke to me, and I finally know what God's will is. He's like, oh, that's so wonderful. How did it happen? And I was like, I heard God's voice. He said, my son, thou shalt go to Egypt and dig a well. And like, thou shalt? I'm like, that's what he said. It's the most fantastic thing ever, And he's like, wait, you're in sober living? Yeah. He's like, you have a passport? No. You have a tractor? No. You know how to find water underground? No. Right? I don't know that God wants you to go to Egypt and dig a well, right? Maybe God wants you to just stay in sober living and figure out how to complete it, And so I started to have this experience where God could speak to me through other people if I opened up and shared with them. So to answer your question is, in recovery, do I need to stay in recovery? Where are you experiencing God's voice in your life that's given you the direction that's turning your life and helping you to stay sober? Wherever that is, that's the thing you don't need to stop. I don't know if I'm finding that in church, in prayer, in working with other alcoholics, in a meeting. I don't know where you're, wherever you're finding that, that's the thing that I can't break free from. Does that make sense?
Wait, let me suggest then that part of your being here today is part of your recovery. Is that fair?
It is.
That this is good for your recovery
100%.
to do what you're doing today and what you do every day.
100%.
Is that fair?
It's one of those, I'm going to say this. Addiction's the only thing I've ever been good at in my whole life. It's true, though. It really is true. But yeah, I think that it's kind of like those who can't do teach, and like it's one of those, like, if you really want to know if you know something, try to teach it, and so this has impacted me, and if I can present the information, then I know it more clearly, and the more clear I know it, then the better I understand it, and the more likely I am at practicing.
Hey, Wade, thank you for your honesty and your openness. In reference to the allergy, isn't there science to back up that alcoholics process things differently biologically, the dopamines and all that?
Yes,
Could you
ma'am.
help us understand that some?
Call the doctor. No. There's some enzyme in the liver of an alcoholic. Am I correct, Brad? It's in the liver that processes alcohol out of the body. And so in a normal functioning person, if I'm correct here, that enzyme attacks the alcohol. In the alcoholic, the alcohol attacks the enzyme. And so maybe that's backwards. Whatever it is, there's a biological difference that's backwards from one another. And so the body has to have more alcohol to continue that, to be able to process it out, right? For a normal person, quit putting it in there, it'll process it out. For an alcoholic, that's the opposite. You have to keep putting more in it or it can't process it out. And so, yes, there is a deeper, like, biology thing that an alcoholic has to have more alcohol. And that's true if you know anything about detox, alcohol is the one that you'll die from, right? So there is something in there that's true there. Yes, ma'am.
One question, and we're going to
That's it.
switch gears.
I'll be quick. Thank you for your vulnerability in sharing your story today. You said something a few minutes ago. I want to make sure I heard clearly that this spiritual malady, these feelings of less than, that you still have those feelings today. So as a pastor, I believe that God can help overcome those feelings in someone, but then I hear someone who has a totally different experience from what I have telling me that these feelings still exist. So I guess my question is, am I just blowing smoke when I tell somebody that God can help them overcome those feelings? Or is that just one piece of it? Or should, as a pastor, I do my very best to get someone into recovery?
My answer to that would be, just because I have an uncomfortable moment and I feel inadequate, but then I look at the facts and I overcome it in the moment, right? Then didn't God overcome it or help me overcome it? Just because it shows up again 30 minutes later or 3 days from now doesn't mean that God didn't overcome it or help me to overcome it, right? It's just not permanently eradicated. It's just a constant. There's rinse and repeat, right? It shows back up, God comes in, cleanses it. Shows back up, God does it again. It shows up, God does it again, right? I think forgiveness is the same thing, It's like we ask for forgiveness or we forgive others and we think like the one and done thing, when the reality is, no, when I forgive someone, I have to forgive them for a bunch before I finally get to the complete forgiveness, right? So I don't know that I look at it as like, well, God isn't really showing up and doing what I think he's doing. Like, he is. He's just doing it more than once. Somebody over here.
I want to thank you so much for your testimony and being authentic. I've been working with youth for about a decade now with my wife. And one thing that I think that I see a lot with the biggest struggle is identity. So I'm really big on teaching, identity in Christ, and you are not who you were, and you are not your past. And this idea of a new creation in Christ. But then so often I hear people still, as yourself, say, hey, I've been clean 8 years, and they introduce themselves as an addict. So I don't know. I guess that kind of breaks my brain on, maybe you have better insight on that.
I don't mean to rub anybody the wrong way in here. I was approached by my church in Mobile. We won't talk about what that is. And they said, hey, we want to make a difference in addiction in our community. And so me and a couple other people, what are you doing for it right now? Right? And they had their meeting. We went to their meeting. We looked at all the things that they were doing, and we said, this is kind of like a plan that we think would be effective. That's irrelevant. We sat down with the pastor and another member higher up, and we're going to present our plan. And I referred to myself as an addict or an alcoholic a couple of different times, and he stopped me finally, and he says, you got to stop saying that. And I was like, stop saying what? Like, you got to quit calling yourself an alcoholic. That's not a life-giving term. Sir, with all due respect, the guy I was the day that I started to call myself an alcoholic and the guy I am today, like, that's the most life-giving words I've ever uttered, is I'm an alcoholic. And so I'm going to continue to say I'm an alcoholic, right? And the more I've said it, the longer I've said it, my life keeps getting better and better and better and better. So I don't know that I'm identifying as like I'm active in addiction. I'm just identifying that I'm humble and I'm standing under God in that moment. When I say I'm an alcoholic, I'm just saying I'm a person that needs God's help. So I don't know if that makes sense. Right?
Well, I think the other thing, too, I think we have to use that word as an adjective and not a noun. Okay, I believe when you say I'm an alcoholic, 8 years later, you're describing part of who you are. 8 years ago, it was a noun. It was everything. And so I think what we've done is Wade's changed from a noun to an adjective. And that's important in terms of process. Is that helpful? Okay.
It's just all I'm referring to is like, it's just the way that my mind works. That's it.
We're going to take 10 minutes, restrooms, coffee, whatever. Wade. Thank you.